A front page story in the New York Times hit on exactly that today with a headline that says, quote, tax burden lower for most Americans than in the 1980s. Let's talk more about it. Joining us, New York Times Washington correspondent Binyamin Appelbaum, who co-authored the article. All right, Binyamin, I like the story because we've been hitting on the same thing for about 2 years about tax rates on the federal level going down. But I did think that an important part of your story was in the middle, where it said, yeah, federal tax rates have gone down, but state and local tax rates have gone up about as much to negate any gain to the lower and middle income households.
I think that's one of the most important points here. Great transition, by the way. We should have used Thriller in the story, would have grabbed our readers a little harder. But yeah, you've hit one of the most important points, which is that federal taxes are down for everyone, but a lot of people aren't seeing the savings because state and local taxes have come up. And that's particularly true at the lower end of the income spectrum. It's particularly true for families making the median income or less than that.
And why do you think then, politically, with so much attention on, say, the Buffett rule or the president's tax plan and the bickering over federal income taxes, that we haven't paid more attention to property, state, local, and sales taxes?
One big reason is that this data doesn't exist. We created a model so that we could simulate the way that this tax burden is distributed, but there's no government entity who looks at the total burden of taxation. No one counts how much you pay in all taxes except maybe you yourself. There is no centralized data, and so people really miss this point. They don't appreciate the extent to which state and local taxes are interacting with federal taxes and really consuming the savings that people otherwise might be getting. It's just a new way of looking at it.
And there's something that I guess is being colloquially called Hauser's Law, where the idea being no matter where tax rates are, tax revenues as a percentage of GDP are going to remain constant or relatively constant over time. Have you been getting pushback to your story about that concept? It doesn't matter where taxes are, the government's going to collect about the same?
Well, it's an important thing to understand. That's true. Whether or not it's a law is a different question, but it is absolutely true that revenues as a share of total income have remained pretty stable. The big point here is that the distribution has changed. Relatively speaking, a lot less of that money is coming from the top of the income spectrum. They make more, they're paying more, but the share of income they're providing to the government is a lot smaller than it used to be. Conversely, at the bottom end of the income spectrum, those people are paying, they haven't seen anything like those cuts. So, yeah, it's fine to say that there's been a relative stability, but you don't want that surface sameness to cover up a really important shift underneath it, which is that the distribution, the way that cost is shared across the population, that has changed pretty dramatically.
I know, but what can we do about it, Binyamin? Because the point you made is a good one, which is that the federal government has tried to help, right? They've cut tax rates on the lower and middle end, right? Well, for everybody, but let's say the help there, that's supposed to add more money to your pocket. Pay less, keep more, but then the states, the towns, the property, they've all come and just taken it right back.
Yeah, so I mean, if you think this is a problem, and not everyone does, it should be said, but if you do, if you think the tax burden ought to be distributed more progressively, then probably the most important thing here is the decline of the federal income tax as a source of revenue. It's not just a question of rising state and local taxes. It's the fact that the federal payroll tax now brings in almost as much money as the federal income tax. People say, hey, that's Social Security, it's its own thing. It's not. It's the same government. They've chosen to raise a growing share of revenues with a flat tax rather than an income tax. It's a new way of raising money. It's different than it used to be.
So would you support a bumper sticker that says, blame your governor, not your president?
I'm not here to run campaigns. I'm just here to put out the information. But people who are concerned about it ought to be thinking about the state and local level. A lot of the trend is happening now.
It was a thought-provoking article. Binyamin Appelbaum, thank you very much for joining us. Have a good weekend.
You too.